The bitter February wind cut through Evelyn Carter's thin wool coat as she stepped off the train platform in St. Louis. Her gloved fingers clutched the worn leather handle of her small valise, knuckles white beneath the fabric. Inside that case lay everything she owned in this world: 2 simple calico dresses, her mother's Bible, a daguerreotype of her parents taken before the consumption claimed them both, and most importantly, the letter from Samuel Morrison, the widowed blacksmith who would become her husband. She'd read that letter so many times during the journey from Philadelphia that the paper had grown soft at the creases. His handwriting was rough but earnest, promising her a good home in Mercy's Bend, Nebraska territory. He needed a mother for his 2 young sons. He'd written, and a helpmate for the hard life on the frontier. It wasn't a love match, they'd never even met, but it was honest work and a chance for a new beginning. The wagon master, a grizzled man named Josiah Hicks, barely glanced at her as she approached the convoy. "You the mail-order bride headed to Mercy's Bend?" He grunted around a plug of tobacco. "Yes, sir. Evelyn Carter. Get yourself situated in the Wheelers' wagon. We leave at dawn." The Wheelers were a young couple with 3 small children, kind enough but already overwhelmed with their own struggles. Evelyn made herself useful, helping Mrs. Wheeler with the baby and mending torn clothes by lamplight. The days blurred together, endless prairie, dust that coated everything, the constant creak of wagon wheels, and the lowing of oxen. They were 12 days out of St. Louis, somewhere in the northwestern reaches of Nebraska territory. When everything went wrong, the attack came at dusk. Evelyn was walking alongside the wagon, stretching her legs after hours of cramped sitting, when the first shots rang out. Men on horseback, white men, she realized with shock. Not the Indians everyone feared, came thundering down from the rocky hills, firing rifles and shouting, "Bandits!" someone screamed. "Circle the wagons!" But it was too late. The outlaws were among them, and chaos erupted. Evelyn saw Mr. Wheeler fall, clutching his shoulder. "Mrs." Wheeler screamed, gathering her children in the confusion of gunfire, shouting, and panicking animals. Evelyn found herself separated from the wagon. A bearded outlaw rode straight at her, reaching down to grab her arm. She twisted away, running blindly into the gathering darkness. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of the raid continuing, women screaming, men cursing, guns firing. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled, stumbling over rocks and through patches of snow. When she finally collapsed behind a cluster of boulders, the sounds of violence had faded to distant echoes. The temperature was dropping rapidly. Her coat, adequate for the wagon's protection, offered little defense against the mountain cold. She had no food, no water, no blanket, nothing but the clothes on her back. Through the long, terrifying night, she huddled in a crevice between rocks, shivering violently. Every sound made her heart race. Was it the bandits? Searching for stragglers? Wild animals? She thought of Samuel Morrison waiting in Mercy's Bend, of the life that had seemed so certain just hours ago. Would he think she'd changed her mind? Would anyone survive to tell him what happened? Dawn came slowly, painting the sky pale pink over the snow-covered peaks. Evelyn's lips were cracked, her throat parched. She had to move, had to find help or shelter. But which direction? Everything looked the same. Rolling hills dotted with pine, patches of snow, and no sign of civilization. She walked for hours, growing weaker with each step. The sun climbed higher but brought little warmth. Her feet, in boots meant for city streets, not mountain terrain, grew numb. When she stumbled and fell into a snowbank, she almost didn't get up. What was the point? She was going to die out here, alone and forgotten. That's when she heard them. Wolves. 3 of them emerged from the tree line, gray shadows against the white snow, yellow eyes fixed on her. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. She grabbed a fallen branch, knowing it was useless but unable to simply surrender. The lead wolf lowered its head, lips pulling back from sharp teeth. The rifle shot split the air like thunder. The wolves scattered, vanishing into the trees as quickly as they'd appeared. Evelyn spun around, branch still raised, to see a rider approaching on a painted horse? Her first thought was relief rescue. Her second was confusion. This was no white settler or soldier. The man who dismounted was tall and lean, dressed in buckskin and fur, with long black hair tied back with a leather cord. His face was angular, weathered by sun and wind, unmistakably Indian. He held a rifle loosely in one hand, studying her with dark, unreadable eyes. Evelyn's mind raced with every terrifying story she'd heard about savage Indians, about what they did to white women. But she was too weak to run, too cold to fight. When he took a step toward her, she swayed on her feet. He said something in a language she didn't understand, his voice deep but not harsh. When she didn't respond, he tried again, gesturing to her and then to his horse. The meaning was clear. Come with me. What choice did she have? Stay here and freeze to death, or be eaten by wolves, or go with this stranger and face what? When she nodded shakily, he approached slowly, as one might approach a frightened animal. Up close. She could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a scar across his left eyebrow. He shrugged off his buffalo robe and held it out to her. The warmth of the fur nearly made her cry. He helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. She tensed at the necessity of his arms around her as he took the reins, but he held himself carefully, touching her no more than necessary to keep them both balanced. They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably less. Evelyn drifted in and out of awareness, exhaustion and cold taking their toll. She was vaguely conscious of entering a sheltered valley, of smoke rising from what looked like temporary shelters, not the grand teepees she'd imagined, but smaller, more practical structures covered in hides and canvas. He stopped before one of these shelters and dismounted, then helped her down. Her legs buckled, and he caught her, saying something that might have been concern in his unfamiliar tongue, half carrying her. He guided her into the shelter. Inside, a small fire burned in a central pit, the smoke rising through a hole above. Buffalo robes and blankets lined the ground, and huddled near the fire was a child, a girl of perhaps 6 or 7, with tangled dark hair and enormous brown eyes that widened at the sight of Evelyn. The man spoke gently to the child, who scooted back but continued staring. He settled Evelyn near the fire, tucking more furs around her, then handed her a wooden cup filled with something warm. Tea, she realized, though made from unfamiliar herbs. She drank gratefully, feeling life seep back into her frozen limbs. The little girl crept closer, fascination overcoming fear. When Evelyn managed a weak smile, the child whispered something. Then, to Evelyn's complete shock, she tried again in accented but clear English. "You hurt." Before Evelyn could respond, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the man's face, watchful and unreadable in the firelight, standing guard between her and the entrance. She dreamed of her mother, pale and thin in her sickbed, but still beautiful, reaching out to touch Evelyn's face. "Don't judge by appearances, my darling," her mother whispered. "The heart sees truest." The image shifted, and suddenly it was the Indian child's small hand reaching for hers, whispering words Evelyn couldn't quite catch but somehow understood. "Papa's in danger." Evelyn woke to the sound of morning birds and the crackle of a freshly fed fire. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was, the smell of smoke and leather, the rough texture of buffalo fur against her cheek, the curved walls of hide surrounding her. Then memory flooded back, and with it, a spike of fear. She sat up carefully, wincing at the protest of sore muscles. The shelter was empty except for her, though she could hear voices outside, that lilting, unfamiliar language that reminded her how far she was from anything known or safe. The entrance flap lifted, and the little girl from the night before peered in. Seeing Evelyn awake, she smiled shyly and entered, carrying a wooden bowl. "Food," the child said carefully in English, offering the bowl. It contained a thick porridge of some kind, dotted with dried berries. Evelyn's stomach clenched with hunger, overriding any concerns about what might be in it. "Thank you," she said, taking the bowl. "What's your name?" The girl's face lit up at being understood. "I am—" She paused, struggling with words, then pointed to herself. Mary. It was clearly not her real name, but one given for English-speaking tongues. She pointed at Evelyn questioningly. "Evelyn. My name is Evelyn." "Evelyn," Mary repeated carefully. Then, growing bolder, she sat cross-legged beside Evelyn and watched her eat with the unabashed curiosity of childhood. When the man entered, the one who'd saved her, Evelyn tensed instinctively. In daylight filtering through the smoke hole, she could see him more clearly. His face was weathered but not old, marked by that scar above his eye and others she hadn't noticed before. His hands, she noticed, were gentle as he added wood to the fire. He spoke to Mary in their language, and the girl responded eagerly, gesturing at Evelyn. Whatever she said made him almost smile, just a slight softening around his eyes. He looked at Evelyn then, really looked at her, and she found herself unable to read his expression. Mary tugged at Evelyn's sleeve. "This is—" She paused again, then made a decision. "John, Papa John." Another English convenience. Evelyn realized. The man, John, said something that sounded mildly reproving, but Mary just grinned. Over the following days, Evelyn began to understand the shape of her new reality. This wasn't a large tribal encampment, but a small group of survivors, perhaps 4 or 5 families, who had made winter camp in this sheltered valley. They weren't the fierce warriors of sensational newspaper stories, but people trying to survive, just as she was. John, she learned through Mary's limited English and much gesturing, was not the child's blood father. Mary's parents had died. She made a gesture of sickness, coughing, and John had taken her in. The girl clearly adored him, following him like a shadow when he'd let her, chattering in their language with occasional English words thrown in like pebbles in a stream. Evelyn expected to be treated as a prisoner, but instead found herself— ignored wasn't the right word. Watched, certainly, cared for, surprisingly, but no one tried to hurt her or even speak to her much beyond Mary. The women looked at her with curiosity and some suspicion. But when she tried to help with small tasks, gathering firewood, minding younger children, they allowed it. She kept thinking she should try to escape, to find her way back to civilization, to Samuel Morrison and the life waiting in Mercy's Bend. But where would she go? She had no idea which direction led to safety, no supplies for such a journey, and increasingly, shamefully, she found herself not entirely eager to leave. There was something peaceful about the rhythm of life in the camp. Hard. Certainly, everyone worked constantly just to survive the winter. But there was no pretense here, no false politeness hiding cruel intentions like she'd known in Philadelphia society. When John's aunt, she thought the older woman was his aunt, disapproved of Evelyn's presence, she showed it plainly. When Mary was happy to see her each morning, that joy was equally genuine. Evelyn began learning their routines, how to properly bank a fire to last through the night, how to repair tears in hide clothing using sinew and bone needles, how to prepare the unfamiliar foods that kept them alive, dried meat, root vegetables she couldn't name, tea made from pine needles that tasted of resin but warmed her through. John watched all of this with his quiet intensity. He never spoke to her directly. The language barrier stood between them like a wall, but sometimes she'd catch him looking at her with something like puzzlement in his dark eyes. Once, when she was struggling to help Mary carry water from the nearby stream, he appeared and simply took the heavy buffalo stomach bag from her, carrying it himself. No words, just practical assistance. It was during her second week in the camp that Evelyn began to see beyond John's stoic exterior. She woke one night to the sound of distress, not quite crying, but ragged breathing and low, anguished sounds. Peering past the banked fire's glow, she saw him sitting upright in his sleeping robes, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. A nightmare, she realized. Whatever haunted him in sleep had followed him to waking. Without thinking, she began to hum, a lullaby her mother used to sing, wordless but soothing. He startled, looking up, And for a moment she saw raw pain in his eyes before the mask of composure slipped back into place. He said something, quiet and incomprehensible, then lay back down, but his breathing steadied, and Evelyn continued humming until she was sure he slept again. The next morning, he left a small gift by her sleeping place, a pair of fur-lined moccasins to replace her ruined boots. Mary was delighted, showing Evelyn how to properly tie them, chattering about how Papa was the best at making warm shoes. As days passed, Evelyn found herself telling Mary stories to pass the long evenings, fairy tales half-remembered from childhood, Bible stories simplified for young ears. The girl's English improved remarkably fast, and sometimes other children would creep in to listen, even without understanding the words, drawn by the cadence of storytelling. "Tell about Princess," Mary demanded one night, curled against Evelyn's side like a trusting puppy. Once upon a time, Evelyn began. There was a princess who lived in a tall tower. She was halfway through Rapunzel when she noticed John had entered silently. He sat just within the circle of firelight, working on repairing a bridle, but she could tell he was listening. When she reached the part where the prince called up to Rapunzel, Mary interrupted. "Like Papa," she said excitedly, then turned to John and said something in their language. He shook his head, but Mary insisted. "Papa save his—" She struggled for the word, then made a gesture of long hair. "His woman, from bad men, long ago." John spoke sharply, and Mary subsided, but not before whispering to Evelyn. "She gone now, sick." The child's matter-of-fact tone couldn't hide the sadness in the words. Later that night, after Mary slept, Evelyn found herself alone with John by the fire. The silence between them felt heavy with unspoken things. She wished desperately she could talk to him, could ask about the woman Mary mentioned, could explain that she understood loss, having buried both parents within a year of each other. Instead, she simply said, "Thank you for—" She gestured at the moccasins, at the shelter, at Mary, sleeping peacefully. "For everything." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful, as if testing unfamiliar sounds. "You, good, with child." They were possibly the first English words she'd heard him speak. Halting and accented but clear, the effort it must have taken. To learn even that much of her language when her people had taken so much from his. "She's a wonderful girl," Evelyn said softly. "You're a good father to her." He didn't understand all the words. She could tell, but something in her tone must have translated. The ghost of a smile touched his lips before he rose and went to his own sleeping robes. That night, Evelyn dreamed again of her mother, but this time the dying woman's words were different. "Home isn't always where you expect to find it, my darling. Sometimes it finds you." When she woke in the gray pre-dawn, she found Mary had crept over in the night and was sleeping curled against her side, one small hand clutching Evelyn's sleeve, looking at that trusting little face. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest, for the first time since the attack on the wagon train. She didn't wake thinking of escape. She woke thinking of gathering enough wood for the morning fire, of helping prepare breakfast, of the new words Mary would teach her today, of the quiet man who carried such sadness behind his watchful eyes but still made room in his life for an orphaned child, and now, it seemed, for a lost woman who didn't belong but was beginning to wish she could. The late March sun had begun to soften the snow's grip on the valley, revealing patches of brown earth and the first brave shoots of grass. Evelyn had been with the small band for over a month now, and the rhythms of their life had become her own. She woke each morning knowing her tasks, helping to prepare the morning meal, gathering firewood with Mary chattering at her side, mending clothes with the women who had begun to accept her presence, if not quite welcome it. It was on such a morning, crisp but promising warmth, that she decided to venture further from camp than usual. The women were busy with hide work, and Mary was helping her aunt with the baby. Evelyn wanted to find the early spring roots John's aunt had been teaching her to identify, wild onions and biscuit root that would add variety to their diet. She hummed as she walked, the melody of an old hymn mixing with the sound of snowmelt trickling down the hillside. The basket on her arm held a few precious finds, and she was thinking of how pleased Mary would be with fresh additions to their evening meal. She didn't realize how far she'd wandered until she looked up and couldn't see the smoke from the campfires. A flutter of panic touched her chest. Which direction had she come from? The hills all looked similar. Pine and juniper dotted slopes with patches of remaining snow. She turned in a slow circle, trying to remember landmarks. But in her contentment, she hadn't paid proper attention. Stay calm, she told herself. Think. The sun had been on her right shoulder when she left camp, so if she kept it on her left going back... But how long had she been walking? Had she turned without noticing? She chose a direction that seemed right and began walking, but nothing looked familiar. The panic grew stronger. She remembered those first terrible days after the wagon train attack, the fear and cold and certainty of death. But that was different. Now she had a place to return to, people who would notice her absence. John would look for her. Wouldn't he? In her haste, she didn't see the patch of ice beneath the thin layer of new snow. Her foot slipped, ankle twisting painfully as she fell. The basket flew from her arm, scattering her carefully gathered roots across the ground. When she tried to stand, sharp pain shot up her leg. "No, no, no," she whispered, testing the ankle again. She could put some weight on it, but walking any distance would be agony. She managed to hobble to a fallen log and sat, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. The sun was already past its zenith. How long before darkness fell, before the temperature dropped, before the wolves came out? She tried calling out, but her voice seemed small in the vastness of the hills. Who would hear her, even if they searched? How would they find one woman in all this wilderness? The sun sank lower, painting the sky orange and pink. Evelyn had managed to gather some sticks and dry grass, remembering John's lessons about fire-making. But her trembling hands couldn't manage the fire drill properly. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and her ankle throbbed with each heartbeat. Then she heard it, someone calling. Not her name, but a word she'd learned meant, "Where are you?" in their language. John's voice, carrying across the distance. "Here," she cried out. "I'm here. Help!" The calling continued, growing closer. Then he appeared through the trees, rifle in hand, and the relief that flooded through her was so intense her eyes filled with tears. He took in the situation with one quick glance. Her swollen ankle, the scattered roots, the failed attempt at fire-making. Without a word, he knelt beside her, his hands surprisingly gentle as they examined her injury. She gasped when he touched a particularly tender spot, and he murmured something that sounded apologetic. He spoke in his language, gesturing at her ankle and then at his back. The meaning was clear. He would carry her. Evelyn's face burned. She wasn't a small woman, and the camp was far. "I can walk," she said, attempting to stand. The moment she put weight on the ankle, she nearly collapsed. He caught her, steadying her with one arm, and gave her a look that clearly said, "Don't be foolish." Before she could protest further, he had turned his back to her, crouching slightly. Having no choice, she awkwardly climbed onto his back, arms around his shoulders. He stood easily, as if she weighed nothing, and began the journey back to camp. The intimacy of it overwhelmed her. She could feel the warmth of him through his buckskin shirt, smell the mixture of wood smoke and pine and something uniquely him. Her face pressed against his shoulder. She was acutely aware of every movement, every breath. This was more physical contact than she'd had with any man, even during her engagement to a shopkeeper's son back in Philadelphia, an engagement that had ended with his death from typhoid. He walked steadily, never stumbling despite the uneven ground and fading light. Once, when they had to traverse a particularly steep section, she felt his hands adjust their grip on her legs, making sure she was secure. The careful way he touched her, maintaining her modesty even in this necessary closeness, made something warm bloom in her chest. They didn't speak, couldn't speak, but somehow the silence didn't feel empty. When they finally reached the camp, Mary came running, eyes wide with worry. She chattered at John in rapid words, clearly scolding him for not including her in the search. John carried Evelyn directly to their shelter, setting her down gently near the fire. His aunt appeared with her medicine bundle, clicking her tongue at Evelyn's swollen ankle as the older woman worked, applying a poultice of herbs and binding the ankle tightly. John built up the fire and prepared tea. Later, after Mary had been reassured and settled for sleep, after John's aunt had given final instructions about keeping the ankle elevated, Evelyn found herself alone with John again. He was working on something. She realized with a start that he was weaving a support from willow branches, something to help her walk while the ankle healed. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I was careless. You must think me very foolish." He looked up from his work, studying her face in the firelight. Then, carefully, he spoke in English. "No, you learn is good." "You speak more English than you let on," she said, surprised. A slight shrug. "Little. From traders. From—" He paused, something painful flickering across his face. Before. From his wife. Evelyn realized, the one Mary had mentioned, who was gone now. "Will you teach me?" she asked impulsively. "Your language? I want to learn." He looked surprised. Then something else. Pleased, perhaps. He nodded slowly. You teach, English. For Mary." "Yes," she agreed quickly. "Of course." He returned to his work on the walking support, but the atmosphere had changed. It felt like a door had opened between them. Just a crack, but enough to let light through. As she prepared for sleep, ankle propped on rolled furs as instructed. Evelyn reflected on the day, the fear when she was lost, the pain of injury, but mostly the feeling of being carried through the wilderness by a man who owed her nothing but had searched for her anyway. The careful strength of his arms, the steady beat of his heart against her chest, the safety she'd felt despite everything. She thought of Samuel Morrison, waiting in Mercy's Bend, probably thinking her dead. The guilt of that twisted in her stomach. He was a good man who deserved better than a bride who never arrived. But when she tried to picture the life she would have had, keeping house for a stranger, raising another woman's children, making a marriage work with a man she'd never met, it felt like trying to remember a story someone else had told her. This, improbable as it was, felt real. Mary's small hand in hers. The satisfied tiredness after a day's good work. The way John had looked at her when she asked to learn his language. Surprised and pleased, and something else she didn't have words for yet. Her ankle throbbed, reminding her of the day's misadventure. But stronger than the pain was the memory of being held, being sought, being brought home. Home. When had she started thinking of this place as home? As sleep took her, she heard John bank the fire for the night, heard him speak quietly to Mary, who had woken and murmured something. His voice was low and soothing. The voice of a father comforting a child. The voice of a man who had known loss but still had gentleness to give. Tomorrow, she thought drowsily, she would begin learning their language properly. She would find ways to contribute despite her injury. She would stop thinking of when to leave and start thinking of reasons to stay. The fire crackled softly, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. But it no longer sounded like a threat. It was just another voice in the wilderness, calling to its own kind, finding its way home through the darkness. The morning dawned clear and cold, perfect for hunting. Evelyn's ankle had healed well over the past 2 weeks, thanks to John's aunt's ministrations and the sturdy willow support John had crafted. She could walk without pain now, and had even resumed her daily tasks around the camp. It was Mary who suggested Evelyn accompany them. "Papa go hunt," the girl announced over their morning meal. "You come? Learn track?" John looked up sharply from checking his rifle, clearly about to refuse. But Mary persisted with the unique logic of children. She need learn. What if lost again? Evelyn saw the war in his face, protective instinct battling with practical sense. Finally, he nodded once. "Stay close," he said in his careful English. "Do what I say." They set out as the sun climbed higher, leaving Mary with her aunt. John had given Evelyn a knife to carry. showing her how to strap the sheath to her belt. The weight of it felt strange, but reassuring. He moved through the forest like smoke, making no sound, and Evelyn tried to copy his footsteps, placing her feet where his had been. He taught as they walked, showing her signs she'd never noticed. A broken twig here, a faint impression in mud there. His English was limited, but he supplemented with gestures. And she was surprised how much she understood. A deer had passed this way at dawn. A rabbit den hidden beneath those roots. Bear markings on that tree. Old but worth noting. They were perhaps 2 miles from camp, following a game trail along a ridgeline, when John suddenly stopped, his whole body tensed, head turning slowly as he scanned their surroundings. He held up a hand for silence, then pointed to his eyes and then to the trees below. Evelyn looked but saw nothing unusual. Then, movement, men on horseback, picking their way through the forest. Her first thought was relief. White men meant potential rescue, a way back to civilization. But John's reaction stopped that thought cold. He grabbed her arm, pulling her down behind a fallen log, his face grim. As the riders came closer, she understood why. These weren't soldiers or settlers. Their faces were painted with symbols she didn't recognize, their horses decorated with scalps and other trophies of war. Indians, but not from John's people. The tension radiating from John told her these were enemies. "Crow," he breathed, the word barely audible. His hand moved to his rifle, but Evelyn could count 8 riders, maybe more. He had 1 gun and whatever ammunition he carried. The war party was moving steadily up the ridge, following the same game trail. They would pass within yards of where Evelyn and John hid. She pressed herself lower, heart hammering so loud she was sure they'd hear it. That's when one of their horses scented something. Perhaps them. Perhaps the deer John had been tracking. It snorted and sidestepped, its rider scanning the forest more carefully. He called out to his companions, pointing in their general direction. John made a decision. He shoved the rifle into Evelyn's hands, shocking her, then stood suddenly, drawing their attention. He called out something in a language different from what she'd been learning. Challenging, defiant. The Crow warriors spun toward him, and in that moment of distraction, John launched himself at the nearest rider. The forest erupted in chaos. John dragged one warrior from his horse. They went down in a tangle of limbs. The others were shouting, trying to get clear shots without hitting their companion. Evelyn clutched the rifle, frozen with terror and indecision. A second Crow warrior jumped from his horse, knife drawn, moving to help his tribesmen. John was fighting desperately, but he was outnumbered, and more were dismounting, without conscious thought. Evelyn raised the rifle. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was young, for protection on their small farm. But targets were different from living men. The warrior with the knife had John pinned, blade raised to strike. Evelyn fired. The recoil knocked her backward. The warrior cried out, clutching his shoulder, knife falling from nerveless fingers. John used the distraction to throw off his attacker, rolling free and catching the dropped knife. But more were coming. John fought with desperate skill, but there were too many. Evelyn tried to reload the rifle with shaking hands. Fumbling with powder and shot, a warrior spotted her and started in her direction. She abandoned the gun and drew the knife John had given her, knowing it was hopeless but unable to simply surrender. The Crow warrior laughed at the sight of a white woman with a skinning knife. He said something mocking, reaching for her. Evelyn slashed wildly, catching him across the palm. His amusement turned to anger. He backhanded her, sending her sprawling, the knife flying from her grip. Through blurred vision, she saw John still fighting, blood streaming from multiple cuts. 2 men held him while a third raised a war club. "No!" The scream tore from her throat. She scrambled forward, grabbing a fist-sized rock. The warrior with the club turned, surprised, just as she brought the rock down on his wrist. He dropped the weapon with a howl of pain. Everything happened quickly then. John broke free from his captors. snatching up the fallen war club. A Crow warrior grabbed Evelyn from behind, arm across her throat. John froze, eyes locked on hers. The warrior holding her called out what was clearly a demand, probably for John to surrender. Instead, John spoke in their language, his voice carrying an odd note. The Crow warriors looked uncertain. He spoke again, louder, and Evelyn caught a word she recognized. It meant something like honor or courage. Mary had used it in stories. The warrior holding her loosened his grip slightly, engaging in what seemed to be an argument with his companions. John kept talking, gesturing at Evelyn, at himself, at the fallen warriors. Finally, the one who seemed to be their leader barked an order. They released her, pushing her roughly toward John. He caught her, steadying her, his eyes quickly checking for serious injury. The Crow were gathering their wounded, mounting their horses. The leader said something to John that sounded like a warning or perhaps a promise. Then they were gone, vanishing into the forest as quickly as they'd appeared. Evelyn's legs gave out. She sank to the ground, shaking uncontrollably. John knelt beside her, his hands gentle as they touched her face, turning it to examine where she'd been struck. His thumb brushed away blood from a split lip. "Why?" she managed to ask. "Why did they leave?" He struggled for English words. "You are my woman, wife. They, respect, no honor. Killing woman of warrior who fights well, but will come back, for me, for village." The implications hit her like cold water. He'd claimed her as his wife to save her life, invoking some code of honor among enemies. But now the Crow knew where to find his people. "We have to warn them," she said, struggling to stand. He nodded grimly. But first he recovered their weapons, reloading the rifle with practiced efficiency. As he worked, Evelyn noticed the blood soaking through his shirt. "You're hurt. Later," he said tersely. "Must go now." They moved as quickly as they could back toward camp. Evelyn supported John when he stumbled, his injuries worse than he'd let on. By the time they reached the village, he was leaning heavily on her. Their arrival caused instant alarm. People emerged from shelters, calling questions. John's aunt took one look and began barking orders. Within moments, the camp was in motion, weapons being checked, horses gathered, valuables packed. Mary ran to them, eyes wide with fear at the sight of John's blood. She clutched at Evelyn's skirt. "What happened? Papa hurt?" "He'll be all right," Evelyn soothed, praying it was true. She helped John's aunt strip away his torn shirt, revealing deep gashes across his chest and arms. Nothing fatal, but he'd lost a lot of blood. As the women tended his wounds, John managed to explain what had happened. Evelyn understood enough now to follow the basic story. The camp elders looked grave. The Crow would return with more warriors, seeking revenge for their wounded. That night, as the camp prepared defenses and posted guards, Evelyn sat beside John's sleeping place. He was feverish from blood loss, drifting in and out of consciousness. She bathed his face with cool water, humming softly to soothe his restless movements. "You saved me," she whispered, though he probably couldn't hear. "You claimed me as yours to save my life." His eyes opened, focusing on her with effort. "You fight for me." There was wonder in his voice. "White woman, not run. Fight." "I couldn't let them kill you," she said simply. He raised a trembling hand to touch her bruised face. "My woman," he said, and she wasn't sure if he was delirious or asking a question or stating a fact. "Evelyn, His eyes closed again, hand falling limp. She caught it, holding it between both of hers. Around them, the camp prepared for war. Mary curled against Evelyn's other side, seeking comfort. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows. Evelyn thought of the Crow warrior's hands around her throat, of the moment she'd fired the rifle, of the blood on John's skin. She thought of how he'd looked at her as he claimed her as his wife, the desperate hope and fear in his eyes. She was no longer the proper young lady from Philadelphia, no longer the mail-order bride bound for a respectable marriage. She had fought beside a warrior, drawn blood to defend him, been claimed as his woman before enemies. There was no going back from this. No return to the life she'd known. Gently, she brushed dark hair back from John's fevered brow. "Yes," she whispered to his sleeping form. "Your woman. If you'll have me. Tomorrow would bring danger. Perhaps death. But tonight, she would stand guard over this man who had risked everything to save her, who had seen her not as a helpless white woman, but as someone worth fighting beside." The wolves howled in the distance. But closer still were the sounds of her people, for they were her people now, preparing to defend their own, and Evelyn would stand with them, knife in hand if necessary, protecting this unexpected family that had become her whole world. The first pale light of dawn filtered through the smoke hole, finding Evelyn still awake beside John's sleeping place. His fever had broken near midnight, and he now slept peacefully, breathing deep and even. She hadn't left his side, maintaining her vigil through the long hours, cooling his brow when the fever spiked, holding his hand when nightmares made him restless. Mary stirred against her other side, blinking awake with the resilience of childhood. "Papa better?" she whispered. "Yes, sweet one, much better." The girl smiled and carefully extracted herself, running off to find breakfast. Evelyn watched her go with a fond smile, then turned back to find John's eyes open, watching her with unusual intensity. "You stayed," he said softly, his voice rough from sleep and fever. "Where else would I go?" The words came out more revealing than she'd intended, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. He studied her face, taking in the bruise along her jaw, the dark circles under her eyes from her sleepless night. Slowly, carefully, he reached up to touch the discolored skin. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "You hurt because of me." "No," she said firmly, catching his hand and holding it against her cheek. "I was hurt because cruel men exist in the world. You saved me." Something shifted in his expression, a wall crumbling. "Yesterday, what I say to Crow, that I was your woman," Evelyn supplied, her heart beginning to race. "Your wife." "Yes." He seemed to struggle for words, then switched to his own language, speaking earnestly. She caught perhaps half the words, something about honor, about choice, about wanting. "I don't understand all of it," she admitted when he paused. "But John," she took a breath, gathering courage, "when you said it, to save me, I wished it was true." The look that crossed his face was like sunrise, surprise, hope, and joy mixing together. He sat up slowly, wincing at the pull of bandages, and cupped her face in both hands. "Evelyn," he said, and then a word in his language she'd learned meant beloved, or precious one. She leaned into his touch, eyes fluttering closed. When his lips touched hers, it was gentle as morning mist, careful of her split lip, but holding a promise of deeper fires. She'd been kissed before, chase pecks from her deceased fiancé, but nothing like this. This was acknowledgement, claim, and question all at once. When they parted, she was breathless. Are we?" "If you want," he said carefully. "My people, different from yours, but ritual is ritual, words spoken before witnesses." He gestured to indicate the camp around them. "Already many think you my wife. From yesterday. From before." "Before?" A slight smile. "From when you first stay, share my fire, share care of my daughter." His thumb stroked her cheekbone. "My heart knew before my mind." Tears pricked her eyes. "John, there was a man in Mercy's Bend, waiting for me. A marriage arranged by letter." His face grew still, though his hands didn't leave her face. "You won't go to him?" "No." The word burst from her. "No, I feel terrible guilt about it. He's probably thinking I'm dead. And he seemed a good man from his letters. But I can't imagine leaving here, leaving you and Mary. This has become—" She struggled for words. "This is my home now. You are my home." He kissed her again, deeper this time, one hand tangling in her disheveled hair. when Mary's voice called from outside, announcing breakfast. They broke apart reluctantly. "Tonight," he said quietly, "if you certain. We do proper ceremony. Make true before all." Evelyn's heart soared. "Yes, yes, I'm certain." The day passed in a blur of preparations, despite the looming threat of the crow's return, or perhaps because of it. The camp embraced the idea of a wedding ceremony with enthusiasm. John's aunt, who had been skeptical of Evelyn from the start, seemed to soften when she learned what had transpired. She took charge of preparing Evelyn, commandeering the other women to help. Evelyn was bathed in the stream, gasping at the cold water but submitting to the thorough scrubbing. Her hair was washed with soap root and combed until it shone, then braided with beads and feathers. They dressed her in a soft doeskin dress that had belonged to John's late wife. His aunt made this clear through gestures and a few words, watching Evelyn's reaction carefully. "I'm honored," Evelyn said, touching the beautiful quill work on the dress. "I hope I can be worthy of it." The older woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded approvingly and patted her cheek, the first genuinely affectionate gesture she'd made toward Evelyn. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the small camp gathered. John waited by the central fire, dressed in his finest clothes, his wounds hidden beneath soft leather and ceremonial paint. When he saw Evelyn approaching, his face lit with such naked emotion that she nearly stumbled. The ceremony was unlike anything from her world. An elder spoke words she didn't understand, but the meaning was clear in the ritual movements, the sharing of smoke from a ceremonial pipe, the binding of their hands with a strip of hide. John translated the important parts in whispers, vows to share one fire, one path, one life, to stand together against all dangers, to raise children in wisdom and strength. When it came time for her to speak, she did so in English, knowing John would understand the heart of it, if not every word. "I came here lost and afraid, far from everything I knew. You gave me shelter, protection, and patience, but more than that, you gave me a family. Mary became the daughter of my heart before I even realized it. And you," she squeezed his hands, bound to hers. "You became everything. I promised to stand beside you, to be a mother to Mary and any children we may have, to learn your ways and teach you mine, to face whatever comes with you beside me." John's response was in both languages, halting English mixed with his native tongue. "You brought light to dark lodge, laughter to silent child. You see me not as savage, but as man. I promise protect you, provide for you, honor you as wife, as mother, as woman who fights beside me. My heart is your heart, my path is your path, until the last sunset." The elder completed the ceremony with more words and smoke, and then the camp erupted in celebration. Despite their limited resources and the danger hanging over them, they feasted and danced. Evelyn was pulled into the circle of women, learning their steps, laughing when she stumbled. Mary danced between them all, radiant with joy that her beloved Evelyn was now truly her mother. As the celebration continued, John took Evelyn's hand and led her away from the fire, toward their lodge. Inside, he had prepared a special sleeping place, new furs, sweet grass burning in a small bowl, wildflowers scattered on the bedding. "I have little to give," he said, suddenly uncertain. "No proper bride gifts, no fine house." Evelyn silenced him with a kiss. "You've given me everything that matters." Their coming together was gentle and passionate by turns. He showed infinite patience with her innocence, teaching her pleasures she'd never imagined possible. She traced the scars on his body, learning their stories through touch and broken words. The wound from yesterday's fight was just one more mark of survival, of protection, of love. When they lay entwined afterward, breathless and sated, Evelyn felt a completeness she'd never known. This rough shelter in the wilderness, this man who spoke a different language and lived a different life, this was where she belonged. "I love you," she whispered against his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath her cheek. He said something in his language, then translated, "You are the star that guides me home." Outside, They could hear the camp settling for the night, extra guards posted against the crow threat, but inside their lodge, wrapped in furs and each other, Evelyn and John created their own world. She thought briefly of Samuel Morrison, and promised herself she would find a way to send word that she lived, that he should find another bride. But that was for tomorrow. Tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of her husband, their daughter sleeping safely nearby, their small tribe around them. It wasn't the life she'd planned when she left Philadelphia, but it was the life she'd chosen, fought for, and claimed. As sleep finally took her, she heard John murmur more words in his language, promises, endearments, prayers for their safety. She didn't need to understand every word. The meaning was clear in the way he held her, in the press of his lips against her hair, in the protective circle of his arms. She was home. 3 days had passed since the wedding ceremony. 3 days of a happiness Evelyn had never known possible. She woke each morning in John's arms, prepared meals with the women who now fully accepted her as one of them, and spent her days teaching Mary more English while learning more of their language in return. The threat of the crow still hung over them, but life went on. It was mid-morning when the white trader arrived. Evelyn was working with John's aunt, learning to soften hide with a mixture of brain and liver, when she heard the commotion, a lone rider approaching the camp, calling out in English. Her heart lurched. She set down her work and walked toward the gathering crowd, Mary running ahead. The trader was a grizzled man in his 50s, leading a pack mule loaded with goods. But it wasn't his trade supplies that made Evelyn's blood run cold. It was the way his eyes found her immediately, widening in recognition. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, dismounting. "You're the Carter woman, aren't you? The mail-order bride that went missing from the Hicks wagon train?" Evelyn felt John appear beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "I'm Evelyn," she said carefully. "But I'm not missing." The trader's eyes took in her native dress, the beadwork in her hair, John's proprietary stance beside her. Understanding dawned in his weathered face. "I see. Well, ma'am, your intended Mr. Morrison has been searching high and low, posted rewards in 3 territories. Man's near out of his mind with worry." Guilt twisted in Evelyn's stomach. Is he here?" "No, ma'am, but I know where to find him. He's in Mercy's Bend, like he was supposed to be. Asked every trader and hunter to keep an eye out." The man's gaze shifted to John, and Evelyn saw the calculation there. "He's a good man, Morrison, prosperous, got a nice house, steady business. He'd treat you right." "I'm sure he would," Evelyn said quietly. "But I'm already married." The trader's eyebrows rose. "To him?" He jerked his chin at John. "Ma'am, no disrespect meant, but that ain't a marriage any white court would recognize. You could come with me right now, be in Mercy's Bend in 3 days, and Morrison would welcome you with open arms. He's that desperate for a wife to help with those boys of his." John understood enough English to follow the conversation. His hand found Evelyn's, but he said nothing, leaving the choice to her. It was Mary who broke the silence, pushing between them to grab Evelyn's other hand. "My mama," she said firmly to the trader. "She not go?" The trader's expression softened slightly at the sight of the child. "That's real sweet, little one, but this is grown folks' business." He looked back at Evelyn. "Ma'am, I got to ask plain, are you here of your own free will? Because if these savages are holding you against your wishes, they saved my life." Evelyn interrupted, anger flaring. "When your so-called civilized men, white men, attacked our wagon train and left me to die in the wilderness, these people took me in, fed me, clothed me, taught me, accepted me. And this man," she squeezed John's hand, "is my husband in every way that matters." The trader held up his hands. "No offense meant, ma'am, just doing what I thought was right, but if you're certain, I am—" Evelyn took a breath, forcing calm. "But I would ask a favor. Could you take a letter to Mr. Morrison? He deserves to know I'm alive and well, and that he should find another bride. I'll pay for the service." The trader nodded slowly. I can do that. Won't charge you neither. Morrison already paid me to look. Seems only fair to deliver the news. Evelyn retreated to her lodge to write the letter. Her hands shook as she penned the words, using paper and ink from her salvaged belongings. She kept it simple. She was alive, she was well, she had married another, and she wished him every happiness in finding a more suitable bride. She sealed it with candle wax and returned to where the trader was conducting his business with the camp. As she handed over the letter, John's aunt approached and spoke rapidly in their language. The trader, who apparently knew some of it, responded haltingly. They went back and forth for a moment before the older woman turned to Evelyn. I tell him, she said in her limited English. You are proper wife. By our law, by ceremony. Any who say different, they fight us. The trader looked uncomfortable. I ain't looking for any fight, grandmother. Just thought the lady should know her options. She knows. John spoke up, his English clear despite his accent. She chooses. Every day. She chooses. Something in his tone must have reached the trader, because the man nodded respectfully. I can see that. Ma'am. He touched his hat to Evelyn. I'll see your letter delivered. And if you ever have need of supplies or such, I come through these parts twice a year. You folks have always dealt fair with me. After the trader left, the camp seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn could feel the questions, the concerns. Would she regret staying? Would more white men come looking? She found herself the center of careful attention, everyone watching to see what she would do. She went about her daily tasks as usual, but her mind churned. That night, as she and John lay together in their lodge, she could feel his wakeful tension beside her. You're angry, she said softly. No. He paused. Fear. Fear of what? He turned to face her in the darkness, his hand finding her cheek. Fear you see what you lose. Good house, easy life, your people. John. She caught his hand, pressing it to her lips. Those were never my people. My people are here. You and Mary and your aunt who teaches me even when I'm clumsy. The children who come for stories. The women who welcomed me at your side. This is my family now. But the trader speaks true. White law says we are not married. White law says many cruel and foolish things. Evelyn replied firmly. White law would say you have no right to this land your ancestors lived on for generations. Should we believe that too? He was quiet for a moment, then pulled her close. When I see his eyes on you, I think, maybe I am selfish. Keep you here when you could have better. Better. Evelyn pushed up on one elbow to look at him, though she could barely make out his features in the dark. John, listen to me. In that other life, I would be a stranger in a strange house, raising another woman's children, married to a man I didn't know. Yes, I would have a wooden house and store-bought clothes and tea in china cups, but I wouldn't have Mary calling me Mama. I wouldn't have your aunt teaching me the old ways. I wouldn't have you. She leaned down to kiss him, pouring all her certainty into the contact. I made my choice the night you claimed me before the crow. I made it again in our wedding ceremony, and I make it now, and tomorrow, and every day after. You are my husband. This is my home. No white law or well-meaning trader can change that. He responded by rolling her beneath him, kissing her with a desperate passion that told her more than words how much her declaration meant. They came together with an intensity born of reaffirmed choice, each touch a promise, each gasp a vow. Later, as they lay spent and breathless, Mary crept into their lodge. Mama, Papa, I had bad dream. The man take you away. Evelyn opened her arms, and the little girl burrowed between them. Just a dream, sweet one. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? I promise. Where would I go when everything I love is right here? John's arm came around both of them, holding his family close. Outside, an early spring storm was building, wind rattling the lodge poles, but inside, wrapped in furs and love and belonging, Evelyn felt only peace. She thought of Samuel Morrison receiving her letter, of his disappointment and continued search for a bride. She hoped he would find happiness, But that life, that path, belonged to a different woman. The frightened girl who had stepped off a train in St. Louis with nothing but hope and a stranger's promise. This woman, wife, mother, member of the tribe, had found something worth more than comfort or convenience. She had found a love that transcended language and custom, a family built on choice rather than blood, a home in the heart of the wilderness that felt more real than any city dwelling ever had. The storm broke overhead, rain drumming on the hide roof. But Evelyn slept soundly between her husband and daughter, no longer a stranger in a strange land, but a woman who had found her place in the world. The attack came at dawn, just as the first birds began their morning songs. Evelyn woke to the sound of warning cries and the thunder of approaching horses. John was already up, reaching for his rifle, his face grim in the pale light filtering through the lodge entrance. "Stay with Mary," he commanded. But Evelyn was already moving, grabbing the rifle he'd taught her to use and checking its load. "We fight together," she said firmly. "Mary, go to your aunt's lodge, now." The little girl, trained by a lifetime of danger, didn't argue. She kissed them both quickly and darted out, running low toward the safer center of camp where the elders and children would gather. Outside was controlled chaos. The crow had returned as promised, but in greater numbers than before. Evelyn counted at least 20 warriors, their war cries splitting the morning air. The camp's defenders were outnumbered 3-1. John grabbed her arm. "If something happens to me, nothing will happen to you," Evelyn interrupted fiercely. "We survived this together." They took position behind an overturned travois, using it as cover. The first wave of crow riders swept through the camp, firing arrows and the occasional rifle shot. Evelyn aimed carefully, as John had taught her, breathing out slowly as she squeezed the trigger. A rider cried out and wheeled away, clutching his shoulder. The battle was fierce and desperate. The small band fought with the courage of those defending their families, but the numbers were against them. Evelyn reloaded with hands that no longer shook, fired again. Beside her, John fought like a man possessed, every shot finding its mark. Then she saw him, the Crow war chief, the one who had spoken to John during their first encounter. He was rallying his warriors for another charge, and his eyes found John across the battlefield. He called out something, pointing his lance directly at her husband. A challenge. "No," Evelyn breathed, but John was already standing, setting aside his rifle. "John, don't!" He turned to her, cupping her face briefly. "Honor demands, if I win, they may leave. If not," he pressed something into her hand, a small leather pouch. "For Mary, tell her I fought well." Before she could protest further, he strode into the open space between the defenders and attackers. The war chief dismounted, and an eerie quiet fell over the battlefield. This was the old way, champion against champion, with the fate of many hanging in the balance. The two men circled each other, knives drawn. The war chief was larger, unscarred by yesterday's battle, fresh and strong. John was still recovering from his wounds, moving stiffly. But Evelyn had seen him fight. He was quick, clever, desperate. They clashed in a blur of motion. The war chief's strength showed immediately, driving John back with powerful slashes. But John ducked and weaved. Using his opponent's aggression against him, they grappled, went down in the dust, rolled apart, and came up fighting. Evelyn watched with her heart in her throat, rifle ready but knowing she couldn't interfere. This was beyond her now, beyond the new ways of guns and civilization. This was ancient as the hills, personal as breath. John took a cut across his ribs, blood soaking his shirt. The war chief pressed his advantage, but John twisted away, his own blade finding flesh. Back and forth they fought, both bleeding now, both tiring. Then John slipped on loose stones, going down hard. The war chief lunged for the killing blow. Evelyn's shot took him in the thigh. The war chief stumbled, his strike going wide. John rolled away, came up with a handful of dirt that he flung in his opponent's eyes. In that moment of blindness, John's knife found its mark, sliding between ribs to the heart. The war chief fell, his blood soaking into the earth. For a moment, perfect stillness held the battlefield. Then one of the Crow warriors raised his rifle, aiming at Evelyn in rage. "No!" The word came from an unexpected source, an older Crow warrior who rode forward, dismounting to kneel beside the fallen chief. He spoke rapidly in their language, gesturing at Evelyn, at John, at the camp. Whatever he said caused a ripple of discussion among the Crow. John, breathing hard and bleeding, translated quietly for Evelyn. "He says, the woman fought as a warrior, not murder, battle rights. The chief fell in fair combat." The older warrior stood, giving John a long look. He spoke again, formal words that sounded like a pronouncement. Then he helped lift the chief's body onto a horse, and with a final gesture that might have been salute or warning, led the Crow warriors away. As soon as they were gone, John collapsed. "John!" Evelyn caught him as he fell, easing him to the ground. His shirt was soaked with blood, multiple wounds new and old bleeding freely. "Help!" she cried. "Someone help!" The camp erupted back into motion. John's aunt appeared with her medicine bundle, other women bringing water and bandages. They worked over him with desperate efficiency while Evelyn held his hand, whispering prayers in English and what words of comfort she knew in his language. "You saved me again," she told him as they carried him to their lodge. "That was the bravest, most foolish thing." "You shot him," John murmured, his voice weak but tinged with wonder. "Dishonor yourself. For me." "I'd do it again," Evelyn said fiercely. 100 times. Honor means nothing if I lose you." Mary appeared then, tears streaming down her face. "Papa? He'll be all right," Evelyn assured her, praying it was true. "Your papa is the strongest man I know." For 3 days and nights, John hovered between life and death. His fever raged. His wounds went bad despite all the healing herbs and careful tending. Evelyn never left his side, spooning broth between his lips when he could swallow, cooling his burning skin, singing the hymns of her childhood when he grew restless. On the 3rd night, when his breathing grew shallow and his skin took on a gray tinge, she broke. "Don't you leave me," she whispered harshly, clutching his hand. "Don't you dare. You made me love you, made me choose this life, and you don't get to leave now. Mary needs you. I need you. This child needs you." She hadn't meant to say that last part. She'd only suspected for a week or so. Hadn't even been sure, but the words tumbled out in her desperation, as if he'd heard her through the veil of fever. John's eyes fluttered open. "Child?" he breathed, tears streaming down her face. Evelyn placed his hand on her still flat belly. "Yes, our child. So you have to fight. You have to stay." Something shifted in his eyes, determination replacing resignation. He squeezed her hand weakly and closed his eyes again. But this time his sleep seemed more peaceful, his breathing deeper. The fever broke before dawn, when John woke properly, weak but lucid. Evelyn wept with relief. Mary crawled carefully onto the bed, nestling against his uninjured side, chattering about how scared she'd been and how Mama had sung to him every night, and did he know about the baby? "Baby?" John looked at Evelyn, wonder in his eyes. She nodded, suddenly shy. "If I counted right, he or she will come with the autumn leaves." John reached for her, and she carefully lay down on his other side, mindful of his wounds. "My star," he murmured in his language. "My warrior woman, mother of my children." The camp celebrated their war chief's recovery and the news of the coming child with equal joy. The threat of the Crow had passed. Word came through traders that they had honored the combat, declaring no more vendetta against John's band. Evelyn's actions were debated. Some said she'd shown a warrior's heart. Others worried about the precedent of a woman fighting. But none could deny she'd saved their leader, their protector, John's aunt, who had become like a mother to Evelyn. Pulled her aside one evening as John grew stronger. "You know now," she said in her careful English. "The price, the fear. Still you stay?" Evelyn thought of those terrible days, the blood and violence, and the moment she'd thought she'd lose everything. Then she thought of John's eyes when she told him about the baby, of Mary's joyful planning for a sibling, of this life she'd built from nothing but courage and choice. "Still I stay," she confirmed. "Always." The older woman smiled and patted her cheek. "Good. Strong woman. Make strong children." As spring warmed into early summer and John regained his strength, Evelyn often found herself standing at the edge of camp, looking out at the vast wilderness that was now her world. Sometimes she thought of Philadelphia, of tea parties and proper manners and a life bounded by walls and expectations. Sometimes she wondered what her parents would think of their daughter now, wife to a warrior, mother to an orphan, carrying a child who would grow up between two worlds. But when John's arms came around her from behind, his hands spreading protectively over her growing belly, when Mary ran up to show her some treasure she'd found, when the women called her to come help with the evening meal, all doubts faded. She had been meant to be a mail-order bride, delivered safely to a respectable marriage in a frontier town. Instead, she had become something else entirely, a bridge between worlds, a warrior in her own right, a woman who had looked death in the face and chosen love over safety, family over familiarity. The scar on John's side would always remind them of how close they'd come to losing everything. But scars, Evelyn had learned, were just proof of survival, maps of a life fully lived. And as she felt their child move for the first time, a butterfly flutter of new life, she knew that every scar was worth it for this love, this family, this home carved out of wilderness and held together by choice. The spring of 1882 came early to the Nebraska Territory, melting the last stubborn patches of snow and carpeting the valley with wildflowers. Evelyn stood outside the new cabin, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching as John and several men from their band raised the final wall. It wasn't a grand house like Samuel Morrison might have provided, but it was theirs, built with logs from the forest, chinked with mud and grass, with real glass windows that the trader had brought on his last visit. Mary danced around the construction site, now 7 and tall for her age, chattering excitedly about which corner would be hers and where they would put the baby's cradle. Her English was perfect now, though she spoke both languages with equal fluency, bridging two worlds as naturally as breathing. "Careful, little rabbit," John called out as she darted too close to the working men. His English had improved dramatically over the winter months, aided by long evenings of practice with Evelyn. "Your mother will scold us both if you get hurt." Evelyn smiled at the domestic normalcy of it all. A year ago, she had been a frightened woman lost in the wilderness. Now she was Wichapi, star woman, wife of a respected warrior, mother to a beloved daughter, carrying a child conceived in love rather than duty. The cabin was their compromise between worlds. John's band still moved seasonally, following game and weather patterns, but this permanent structure would be their base, their anchor, close enough to the traditional camping grounds to remain part of the community, but stable enough to weather the changes everyone could see coming as more settlers pushed westward. That evening, as they sat around the fire outside their nearly completed home, Evelyn penned another letter to send with the trader on his next visit. "Dear Mr. Morrison, I pray this letter finds you well and that you have found the helpmeet you sought. As I wrote before, I am alive and well, married now with a growing family. I think often of the life I might have led had circumstances been different, and I hope you do not think too harshly of me for the path fate chose instead. My husband is a good man who provides well for us. We are building a proper cabin with wooden floors and glass windows. Our daughter Mary is learning to read and write in English, and come autumn, she will have a sibling to teach. It is not the life either of us expected when I left Philadelphia, but it is a good life, filled with love and purpose. I have enclosed a small pouch of herbs that grow wild here. They make excellent tea and are said to bring peace to a troubled heart. May you find the same peace and happiness that I have found in my unexpected home. With sincere wishes for your future, Mrs. Evelyn Red Elk. She had taken John's name in the white fashion. Though among his people she remained star woman. It felt right to sign herself thus, to claim fully this life she had chosen. The trader, when he came, brought news from the outside world. The railroad was pushing ever westward. Towns were springing up where once only buffalo had roamed. The old ways were ending, he said, shaking his head. Better to adapt than resist. We know, John said quietly, his arm around Evelyn as they listened. This is why we build, why my children learn both ways. The world changes. We change with it or we disappear like morning mist. Later, as Evelyn taught the camp children their letters using charcoal on flat stones, she thought about change and adaptation. These children would grow up in a different world than their parents, would need skills beyond hunting and hide-working, but they would also carry forward the old stories, the ancient wisdom, the connection to the land that ran deeper than any property deed. Her labor came with the first cool night of September, the leaves just beginning to turn gold on the aspens. John paced outside like any expectant father while his aunt and the other women attended her. Mary held her hand through the worst of it, whispering encouragements in both languages. When their son was born, healthy and strong with a shock of dark hair, John was allowed inside. The look on his face when he held his child for the first time, wonder and joy and fierce protectiveness, made every moment of pain worthwhile. "What shall we name him?" Evelyn asked, exhausted but glowing. John looked thoughtful. "In our way. He would not be named until we know his nature. But in your way." "Thomas," Evelyn said softly. "After my father, Thomas Red Elk, Thomas Singing Wolf." John corrected gently. "My father's name, for his voice that will speak for both peoples." Mary peered at her new brother with fascination. "He's very small. Was I so small?" "Smaller," John told her, ruffling her hair. "But look how strong you grew." As autumn deepened into winter, their life settled into new rhythms. The cabin proved warm and secure, a blend of white construction and native wisdom. Evelyn had insisted on a proper hearth and chimney, while John had oriented the building to catch the morning sun and shelter from the worst winds. She wrote in her journal by lamplight while snow fell outside. November 15th, 1882. Little Thomas grows stronger each day. He has his father's eyes but my stubborn chin. John says, Mary is a devoted sister, singing to him the same lullabies I once sang to her. How strange and wonderful that those Philadelphia hymns now mix with Lakota cradle songs in our small cabin. The trader brought troubling news on his last visit. The government pushes harder for all Indians to move to reservations. John says we may have to make difficult choices soon, but for now, we are safe in our valley. In this place between worlds, I received a letter forwarded from the trader. Samuel Morrison has married a widow from Kansas City. I am glad for him and grateful to be released from that last tie to my old life. I am fully here now, fully committed to this path I chose. Sometimes I dream of my mother. She smiles and tells me she is proud, that love has many faces and home has many forms. I think she would have loved John, would have been enchanted by Mary's quick wit and Thomas's sweet nature. I carry her memory forward into this new world we are building. One night, as a blizzard raged outside, they sat secure in their cabin. John carving a toy horse for Thomas, Mary practicing her letters, Evelyn mending one of John's shirts. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on walls decorated with both her mother's sampler and John's grandfather's war shield. "Tell the story," Mary demanded, as she did most evenings, "about how you came to us." So Evelyn told it again, the wagon train, the attack, the wolves, the rescue. But the story had evolved in the telling, becoming less about fear and loss and more about finding where you belong. Mary knew it by heart, but listened with rapt attention anyway, sometimes correcting small details. "And then Papa said you were his woman," she concluded with satisfaction. "And you stayed forever." Not quite that simple. Evelyn laughed. But yes, that was the heart of it. She had stayed, through danger and doubt, through blood and birth, through the slow weaving together of two lives into one family. John looked up from his carving, catching her eye. In that glance was everything, Memory of their first meeting, acknowledgement of their struggles, promise of their future. He spoke in his language, words she now understood perfectly. My heart sings to see you here, by our fire, with our children. You are the gift the Spirit sent when I had given up hope. And you, she replied in the same language, are the home I never knew I was seeking. Outside, the blizzard howled, but inside their cabin, their home built of wood and love and stubborn determination, all was warmth and light. Thomas stirred in his cradle, making small, hungry sounds. Mary set aside her slate to help change him. John banked the fire for the night while Evelyn settled in to nurse their son. Later, as they lay in their bed with children sleeping peacefully nearby, Evelyn thought about the letter she had written so long ago to Samuel Morrison. I have found my home, not a house built of bricks, but built of heart. It remained the truest thing she had ever written. This cabin in the wilderness, this man beside her, these children they were raising between worlds. This was home. Not the ending she had expected when she stepped onto that train in St. Louis, but the one she had fought for, chosen, and claimed. Through the window, stars appeared as the storm cleared, brilliant in the cold night sky. Her namesake stars, John called them, the ones that guided him home. Evelyn smiled in the darkness, her hand finding his, fingers intertwining. No matter what comes, she whispered, thinking of the uncertain future, the changing world, the challenges their children would face. We'll face it together. Together, he agreed, pulling her close. Always. And in that cabin between worlds, where English lullabies mixed with Lakota prayers, where a mail-order bride had become a warrior's wife, where love had bridged every divide, they slept peacefully while the stars watched over them, a family forged not by blood or law or expectation, but by choice, courage, and the unshakable belief that home is wherever love dwells. The fire burned low, casting its last light on a simple truth carved into the wooden mantle. Words in two languages that meant the same thing. Here lives love, here lives family, here is home. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West Campfire. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales of frontier love and adventure. Please subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Evelyn and John's journey? Your stories and perspectives make our campfire circle complete. Until next time, partners.